Hey everyone, this is Eddie Kalegi with Tim Moore reminding you that SportsSpeak is now powered by SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the one-stop shop for tickets to sporting events, concerts, and so much more.
Use the promo code SportsSpeak at checkout for $20 off your first purchase.
SeatGeek, let there be live. Now, on to the show. Hey guys, what is up? Welcome to episode 181 of SportsSpeak Live. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Powered by SeatGeek. As always, use that promo code SportsSpeak, all caps, one word, $20 off your first purchase. Well, I don't really know what we call this. I think this is our third annual July episode live from a hotel.
I mean, we had the goodness. The first episode that we did was Bruce Beck Camp, of course, at Anchor's Hotel. Last year, we found ourselves here at Pocono, I think a couple days earlier. You get the point. So now we're in actually, I guess it's technically our fourth. Didn't we do one in Jersey as well?
Yes, we did.
So yeah, we're getting
world tour right now. We are here at Pocono Raceway covering the NASCAR action at for Motorsports Today. We're recording this here on Friday night, so we already had a great conversation with Parker Kligerman. We got to see the truck race, some crazy things happen there. So you can always follow along Motorsports Today, MTR SPRTS Today on Twitter, Motorsports Today, across all the other social platforms, and you can check out our content. But this show's not for racing. We're going to touch on some other stuff. And of course, the elephant in the room, because we have Tim here, are those New York Yankees, who had a wild night against the Baltimore Orioles tonight that included a benches clearing brawl when Clay Holmes hit Heston Kjerstad in the helmet with a 98-mile-an-hour fastball.
I'm glad you can pronounce that. I really can. That they pronounce Kjerstad.
What did you think I was going to say?
Oh, listen. I mean, you're coming from somebody that called OG Anunoby a known boy.
A known boy.
So it's very impressive, needless to say. But
thank you.
I'm going to say this, to be honest with you, because granted, I didn't get to see it live, of course, because we were at the racetrack, but I feel like this was kind of hinted for the Yankees. Like going back to the last series against the Orioles, you could feel there was some tension. You could feel that there were some things going on. And ultimately, listen, I'm not saying there was intent, whatever. You never want to hit somebody in the head. But at the end of the day, listen, just like how this was for the Yankees a few years ago with the Tampa Bay Rays, this is the storyline moving forward. But I think the other thing that you have to really consider, if you're Baltimore or the Yankees for that matter, you got to worry because Boston is right around the corner. We're talking about a team that is, 17 games, I think it was, below the AL East just about a month and a half ago. And now they're within 5-6 games of the AL East. So it's like, while it's great to have that division rivalry, I'd much rather prefer, to be honest with you, if it was Boston because there's history there. But it's definitely interesting because the Yankees have done a lot of sucking of late. Let's be honest. So they kind of need something to motivate them. Aaron Judge goes deep today as well. So the Yankees are, I'm not saying in a good spot because they're not right now still, but they needed this actually, even though it may not be exactly.
I mean, when something's going wrong in the locker room, you need something to energize them, whether that's a manager getting tossed from a game or something like this. But you also got to understand this Yankees-Orioles rivalry, it's been brewing the entire season. Frankly, it dates all the way back to when the Orioles got frustrated that Gleyber Torres was hitting 20 bombs off them, but that's when they sucked. Now that both teams are good, well, you don't really think the Yankees are very good, but both teams record-wise are in good playoff position right now, and this has been brewing all year. The Orioles were upset with the way the Yankees were pitching. The Yankees were upset with the way the Orioles were pitching, and they finally go to blows. Brandon Hyde comes out, ends up making contact with Austin Wells, by the way. So Brandon Hyde's going to get himself suspended from this, but it was a wild one, and the rivalry is official between these two teams as we head into the second half of the year.
Man, I think baseball really needs this too. Think about it. I mean, there's been some rivalries over the years, but of late, let's be honest. I mean, what's the biggest one to think about? I mean, of course, nothing goes bigger back in the memory than, of course, the Mets Dodgers back in 2015. With the whole Terry Collins, you got to give me a shot situation. But
because we had two great ones. Then we had that, and then we had Blue Jays Rangers dating back from that Game 5, and then Odor punches Batista. But we haven't had it because Yankees and Red Sox, frankly, haven't both been good at the same time lately these last few years. Dodgers Giants has been a similar deal, and it's been more the Giants not being that good.
And I was going to say, too, the recent situation, if you think about it, it's more about teams pissed off at players. And for example, the Orioles being pissed off about Gleyber Torres, you could say the same thing about Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado, of course, and the Padres as well, back when he was with the Dodgers or even the Orioles. It's those situations where, to be honest with you, it's not really team versus team anymore that we see. And of course, yeah, we still do see some brawls that are reactionary, but they haven't left that long-standing rivalry. Yeah. So baseball needs this. It really does.
And I mean,
regardless of what team. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, we've also seen baseball try to manufacture drama. I'd argue the Dodgers-Padres rivalry for a couple of years. Yeah, they were both good. Yeah, they faced off in a good playoff series in 2020. It wasn't really there. It just happened to be two teams from California that had really good rosters. That bad blood wasn't really there. They tried to incite that, and that really wasn't the case. And now we've seen that fizzle away, even when both teams are still very competitive.
Yeah, I'd like to see in the NL side, to be honest with you, the Mets have come to life late, and granted, I know it's another New York team, but I'd love to see them go at it with the Phillies. I'd love, especially even if the Braves, I know they lost Ronald Acuna, of course, but you got to get things going in the right direction. You got to create a storyline. And listen, it's crazy to think about. It feels like the baseball season just started yesterday. Mm-hmm. We are literally coming to the All-Star break. By the way, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later in a different episode, but one of the weirder All-Star teams I would say in a while. Good to see Paul Skenes, though, in his opportunity on the National League side.
And he's got Riz.
Of course. But, on the AL side, I said this to you when the roster first got announced. I think it's one of the weakest AL teams, and really on the NL side too, all-star teams, I don't want to say of all time, but it comes to the fact that you look at the hitting side, right? Mm-hmm. There was so much production this year in baseball, a lot of your consistency. Of course, Aaron Judge is on pace to still hit 60 home runs. Ohtani's right back on MVP pace again, even though he's just DHing. But on the pitching side, everything's been unpredictable. And I know in the past, for example, you've seen my awful AL Cy Young predictions over the years. It's entirely Major League Baseball this year, not just AL. It's all over the place. There is not a single pitcher, with the exception of maybe two or three, one of them being Corbin Burns, of course, of the Orioles that are really within the top 10 of ERA from last season. I mean, Seth Lugo, we thought his career died after he was a Met. He was a great relief pitcher. He's one of the best elite arms now in baseball as a starter for the Royals.
And the Mets should have used him as a starter, but that's another topic for another day. But a lot of this, again, goes back to this topic that we've talked about multiple times in the show before, is pitcher injuries. Because, I mean, Max Scherzer's made like 3 starts. Justin Verlander came back, got hurt. Garrett Cole came back, didn't look like himself. Clayton Kershaw hasn't even pitched in the majors. I mean, the typical names that we think about are not playing, and that's where you get these statistical categories, and that's where you get Paul Skenes starting the All-Star game. And no knock on Paul Skenes. I mean, he's had a remarkable rookie year with the Pirates, but, I mean, the path has been paved pretty easy for him to get there because his major NL talent, competition-wise, has been hurt.
Well, I was going to say the big thing, too, because you mentioned injuries. In terms of Paul Skenes, again, I would say in terms of the hype of what you've seen, it's the most I've seen for a starting pitcher really since Steven Strasburg. And you know how high I am on Steven Strasburg and just how sensational he was at the start of his career. Paul Skenes is everything he has been put out to be to this point. Down the road, let's be honest, can the Pirates probably pay him? Probably not. They're not known to pay their players. You could probably find him a big market team 4 to 5 years from now. But when it's all said and done, just like how we talked about the last few years about how Ohtani changes baseball, Paul Skenes is going to be one of those household names, not because of Livy Dunn exactly.
But it's not just that. He's really, really good. Last year, he was pitching at LSU, and he's already now one of the best starters in Major League Baseball.
Right. So it's like, he's a great story that people can follow moving forward and get behind with this newer generation. And, to be honest with you, even when I was in college, for example, now, back in 2020 during the pandemic era, there's a lot, for example, my guys going through the system, Gleyber Torres, whatever, didn't turn out to be. Guys like Javier Baez didn't turn out to be. There's a lot of very good players that have come through the minors and have production. But to have the hype and live up the hype to the day one is a very hard thing to do. And Paul Skenes has done exactly that from start to finish. So again, I'm very eager to see. I just hope he doesn't get hurt. Because if he gets hurt, you'll look at, like I said, guys happen, Strasburg, whatever, needs Tommy John. That could be a career changer. Granted, though, when Steven Strasburg got hurt, I'm not saying, technology was different, medical stuff was different, but Tommy John was, I'm not saying rare, but it was harder to do, longer to recover from. I mean, we saw Jason Dominguez get Tommy John surgery. Granted, he's hurt again, but not for that reason. And he's back in less than 9 months. So it doesn't mean anything, but I'm excited to see where his career goes moving forward and what the Pirates can do, especially because let's be honest, we talked about it, what, 3, 4 weeks ago? The season still hasn't changed much. Every team in the NL feels like, except for the Rockies and Marlins, are still in the picture somehow, someway.
And the Pirates are a good team. They've got some good prospects still in the pipeline. I didn't realize Domingo Germán is pitching
Yes.
for Indianapolis, so he might be in the majors. He did pitch a perfect game last year. And this is even with the Pirates' offensive prospects not really panning out the way they would have hoped. Ke'Bryan Hayes has largely been a bust. He's an everyday starter, but that's about it. O'Neal Cruz is maybe still suffering the effects from the injury from last year, but when you look at the numbers and you compare him to some of these other big infield prospects we've seen like Ellie De La Cruz or even CJ Abrams, he's just not putting up those same numbers right now. So he's a good defender. And, he's 6'6" shortstop. You'd love to have that if you're any team. But those guys haven't really panned out. But even with that, the Pirates have been competitive. And Paul Skenes is anchoring it. But the rest of the rotation is pretty solid, too. I mean, Mitch Keller isn't the same pitcher he was last year, but he's still been really, really good. Plus Jared Jones, who did get banged up, but has been great all season as well. But, yeah, it feeds into your point. We're middle of July now. Trade deadline is just a couple weeks away. Once we get past the Home Run Derby, which we're going to talk about in a second, in the All-Star game, it's going to be really exciting. But I don't know how many moves are going to be made. And it's really the same topic of discussion that we've had earlier this year and we had last year, that you're not going to get a busy trade deadline because just because you have a bunch of buyers, you need a bunch of sellers to be able to make moves happen. And right now, besides a couple awful teams, there's no real guaranteed sellers. And those awful teams are so awful that they don't really have many pieces to give away.
Right. And I look on the White Sox, for example, right? Garrett Crochet could be on the market, or I don't even know if that's how you pronounce his last name. So I apologize if I get it wrong. But I just want to make sure. He was a younger star a few years ago of what people expect him to be in the Major League Baseball. He's panned out this year. He's an all-star, of course. I think if you told me a month ago, he would have been someone that could be on the market for the White Sox. I would have said probably not. Teams wouldn't have been looking for him, but he's panned out. But the big thing is too, a lot of these bad teams, let's be honest, there's not really a lot of big pieces that they can go out there and trade. Because, for example, the A's, I mean, he's traded for J.D. Davis. What has J.D. Davis done the last 3, 4 seasons? I know I made the joke he may have been the A's best player to start the year, but like now their best player is Miguel Andujar, former Yankee. What does that do? You look at the White Sox. I mean, outside of Crochet, it's not like you have Tim Anderson anymore. It's not like Moncada, hit, miss, hurt, right? Same thing with Luis Robert. You see all these guys get hurt. Can you trust them? Can you trade for them? I don't know. The Rockies, of course, a lot of people are talking about McMahon. I don't know how I fully buy into that as a Yankees fan, but for other teams that need a third baseman, I can see him being a big target. But other than that, I mean, can the Marlins really go out there and trade this group? Because let's be honest, going into the season, we thought the Marlins were a competitive team. And we talked about this last year as well, because we keep on talking about last season's deadline. Listen, there was a lot of teams last year, the Mets, the Cardinals included, that had some of the best players in baseball, but they didn't make a run. And then they struggled not making the playoffs last year, and they opted not to sell. The Astros this year, for example, are in that situation. They have a lot of good players. And of course, you have the whole situation with Bregman as well. What's going to happen, you don't know. But the idea is that you got to make that decision, and you got to make it really before the end of July. That not even deadline time. You've got to make it crystal clear. And I feel that the Marlins and the Astros, they're not going to be sellers. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I really don't think so, especially not Houston. I don't see how that's in their culture at all. Plus, there's been rumors that they're trying to pursue Pete Alonso. And right now, there's no way I can see the Mets deal Pete Alonso. I could see them sell off a couple pieces, but they're in a playoff spot right now. And, they want Pete there. He's a great defensive first baseman. He's one of the top 5 power hitters in baseball. You want him on that roster. He's been there for the last 6 years. I certainly want him there. I don't think he's going away. But again, this feeds into the discussion that we've had before, but I'm going to go a step further. How the playoff format change for baseball has changed the sport itself more than the playoff format changes in the NFL or the NBA. I mean, when you look at the National Football League adding a seventh team into the postseason, sure, it adds an extra wild card game. The 2 seed isn't as safe, but besides that, what does that really change about the functionality of the sport? There's no real buyers and sellers in the NFL anyway, even with their trade deadline.
I mean, the trade deadline is a very recent thing in the NFL when you really think about it in regards to teams going out there and making acquisitions. I would say 3-4 years ago, you didn't see that at all. So that's something new with, of course, all the cap space changes as well. And basketball, yeah, you see it, but it's superstars talking to superstars and wanting to leave places. It's not as natural. Baseball, it's natural. If you're not doing well, you're going to trade your best player somewhere else if you don't think there's direction. And in baseball, well, I guess in the NFL too, you could see a bad team turn around and be good next year. But in baseball, you see teams flip an instant. Sometimes, I mean, again, we talk about some of the top teams right now, right? The Orioles, it took them a while to build, but it started with a deadline and making decisions to sell.
I understand that, but you're talking about teams that flip and what's natural. But what I'm saying is that's not natural anymore because now with Major League Baseball expanding the playoffs and it becoming abundantly clear that wild card teams can easily make it to the World Series, and many would argue are in a better position to actually make a run because they're consistently playing games than a team that wins their division and has to sit around for a week while these 3-game series play out. So that's why I think baseball making this change, whether you like it or not, you have to understand that the effect that this has had on the game is more than the NBA adding a play-in tournament or the NFL adding 2 more teams, because it's essentially changed the way teams view their rosters because they realize now, even if they're mid, they can win a World Series if they get the 6th seed and they go on a run. And that makes more and more teams reluctant to make moves at the deadline. And that's why we're probably not going to see many trades in a couple of weeks, just like last year.
Yeah, indeed. And again, I think when I was younger, the trade deadline again was the most exciting part. Or I shouldn't say the most exciting part, but one of the most exciting parts about the midseason. Because let's be honest, by July, you have an idea of where your team's going, what the sense of direction is. And I don't know. I just view it as moving forward. I wish baseball could, and it has nothing to do with the playoff system. I wish that maybe they made the deadline earlier or made things so that teams could be more reactive quicker. Because again, for example, 2-3 weeks ago for the New York Yankees, do you think anybody was talking about the Yankee struggles and what the Yankees needed? No, now that the Yankees are playing awful, right? Everybody's talking about what the Yankees need. And for example, everybody talked about what the Mets needed for the first 2 months of the season. And then Grimace came and all of a sudden they're playing great.
I love him.
So it's like you kind of wish from the entertainment standpoint, things are more reactive. But at the end of the day, baseball is baseball. And one thing too, you mentioned something that I think is huge. You mentioned about wild card team runs. What is scary to think about this year is, let's be honest, especially on the AL side, I can think of 3-4 teams that could fall in that wild card scenario and could be a World Series team if how things work out. On the NL side, I mean, yeah, the Braves, whatever. You still have the mix of below 500 teams for the third wild card, but never say never. I think the Cardinals years back proved that. But at the end of the day, I mean, yeah, the Dodgers are the super team, the Phillies are the super team, but history shows they don't win. So we'll see what happens, but I would not be surprised again if we do see another wild card team in the World Series this year.
Now, there's another baseball gripe I have that we need to discuss on this show. Last year, when the All-Star game happened, I said that I'm happy because Major League Baseball is the only one of the 4 major sports where it still feels like the All-Star game matters and that the players care. We are starting to reach a point where I think we're starting to lose that, particularly with the Home Run Derby, because this field for the Home Run Derby this year is not good.
Who's even in it? Because I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't looked once. I just know Judge and Soto don't want to do it unless it's Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, no Judge, no Soto, no Ohtani. Mookie Betts is hurt, no Ronald Acuna. I don't have all 8 names off the top of my head, but the ones I do know: Pete Alonso, Bobby Witt Jr., Jose Ramirez, Alec Boehm, Marcell Ozuna, which there's other issues with Marcell Ozuna being in the...
But hey, Ozuna is on pace for a very good home run count this year. He has, if not doubled nearly tripled his production from last season. A good last 2 seasons for him. Let's be honest on that end.
I know Gunnar Henderson is in it as well, but the common denominator here is that the home run derby field is nowhere close to what we used to see back in the day. And we saw that fall off with the slam dunk contest, for example, in the NBA, because players don't want to embarrass themselves for some reason. And I never really understood it because to me, the home run derby is more of a risk of getting yourself hurt than dunking a basketball. We saw David Wright back in 2007 or 8 participate in the home run derby, get hurt after, not look the same the rest of the season because he threw off his swing trying to swing like crazy for an hour and a half. But that hasn't really been a concern. And now all of a sudden, over the last year or so, the home run derby, which was a special thing and was the only all-star, non-all-star game, all-star weekend festivity in any of the 4 major sports that felt like it mattered. And it's really starting to fall off. Again, credit to the guys who are in the field. None of them are bad players by any sense of the imagination. Marcell Ozuna morally isn't the best player, but he can hit a home run for sure. But the field itself is really disappointing. And for Major League Baseball that wants to market its stars, this is not a good spot to be in when you have unrecognizable names that are going to be there. Maybe they can stand out and they can introduce themselves to the crowd, but your marketable home run hitting names, let's be honest here, are Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge. They're the two that people who don't watch baseball frequently, they probably know. I'm just going to yell this across the room. Adam Trapper, do you know who Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge are?
I do.
Okay, and Adam Trapper doesn't know much about baseball.
That is also true.
Yes, he is a representation of the average American consumer that doesn't watch baseball. So you need those guys there to draw attention to the home run derby. And then if someone can beat Aaron Judge or Shohei Ohtani in a home run hitting competition, their name's going to be known. If they win against a mediocre field, they're going to be known for about 24 hours and nobody's going to talk about it once the second half starts.
No, indeed. That's definitely the situation. And again, going back to when we talked about the NBA All-Star Weekend, Major League Baseball, to give credit, did incentivize home run derby winners. But the only way, as time is going on, inflation is going on, things, the risk, it just doesn't outweigh the benefits for these players. So to me, again, how do you get these players to come out? How do you get the best of the best reform? Incentivize it. Incentivize. Major League Baseball makes a lot of money through every year. You're telling me that, let's say, the home run derby winner can't win $5, $6, $7 million, $10 million. Like for some guys, that's a huge contract.
All they gave him was a damn truck. These guys have cars. They're millionaires. They don't need another car. Yeah. Some of them don't even like trucks.
And here's the thing too. And I just thought about this awful scenario in my head. But do you remember a few years ago when Juan Soto was in the home run derby and he was in the middle of all the discussions with the Nationals about the trade and everything? Good God, Pete Alonso is going to be in that situation this year too.
Yep.
Think about it. And if he wins, it's going to be even worse because the media's not going to care that he won the home run derby. Everybody's going to ask, well, you won this, so what do you have to say to teams that you're going to potentially be traded to? And that's going to be the entire coverage of the weekend. Even if he's not in, let's say, the All-Star game and doesn't play the All-Star game, right? So it's like, I don't know. It doesn't make sense.
And I appreciate Pete Alonso for doing it. Again, this is why it frustrates me. Everybody rips on him every second Monday of July when he's out there and they see him getting locked in with the headphones in and everything. And I saw people tweeting that Pete Alonso being in the home run derby is like a 25-year-old kid going back to visit his high school. It's like, come on. He's one of the best home run hitters in baseball. Don't you want to see your best home run hitters in baseball? If it was my choice, a home run derby, it should feature Alonso, Ohtani, Judge, Juan Soto, Ronald Acuna, Matt Olson.
I mean, for me too, Giancarlo Stanton would have been on that list because he's a hard hitter. I mean,
Yordan Alvarez.
I was just about to say Yordan, and I'd even consider guys too like Cody Bellinger. And again, the reason why Ozuna, and for the record too, not to preview the home run derby, but why I think guys like Ozuna and Alonso are going to be your favorites. I mean, just looking at the analytic details this year. I mean, they hit balls hard when they get control of them. And that's a good recipe for home run derbies. You just got to hope, like you said, no injuries. Because what's the incentive for Pete Alonso? God forbid. That would be the worst thing ever for the home run derby. If he gets hurt and he's out for the season, he pulls something, or he's out a couple months, They can't trade him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other, that's the other problem for Pete Alonso. But for him, this is the best way to showcase himself if he's getting traded. But again, it's the Mets. We don't really know because let's be honest, the Mets are still in the hunt.
They certainly are.
They don't know what they're going to do with Pete Alonso. Again, we talked about in the show. I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up becoming a Yankee, but the Mets should never do that. Trade to a crosstown rival. And I still want to see Jose Abreu as a Yankee, as crazy as that sounds. Especially now with the DH issue, Stanton being hurt. Ben Rice playing first. All he has to do is DH. I mean, oh, come on now. He's better than anybody you could throw out in that lineup on that back half. Yeah, I can even argue he will still be more productive than DJ LeMahieu is as a battle offensively. And I love DJ.
He was the second worst offensive player in the entire league.
Yeah, but now he plays in a Little League Stadium. He'll be okay. He's still better than Joey Gallo.
His strikeout rate was ridiculous.
He's still better than Joey Gallo.
Yeah,
he's better than Aaron Hicks.
But this is the Yankees, and you're settling for a better than Joey Gallo?
I'm settling for somebody that could step in a position until our starter returns. Unlike the third base position, where I want a guy like Nolan Arenado, not exactly sold on McMahon yet, but if that's the solution, it is what it is. But you need an everyday person in that position. Of course, the Yankees, as we found over the last 3-4 weeks, they need pitching. And guess what? Here's the reality too. We talk, not to go back to the deadline talk, but you talk about all these teams competing. Guess what? Every team, doesn't matter what situation you're in, every team needs a bullpen arm. Every team needs a starter. Guess what? There's not 30 bullpen arms out there for you to go get that are just good and out there on the market. So at the end of the day, the Yankees are going to have to pick and choose, right? And at the end of the day, Brian Cashman will probably make the wrong decision. But for the Mets, go buy. Go buy. I'm tired of this evaluation process. When Steve Cohen came in, right, everything was about, I got the money now. I care about the Mets, whatever. They sat here and told us at the start of the season, this team had capability to win games and do whatever. If Pete Alonso is a part of that roster, they better be investing around Pete Alonso, regardless of what Jeff McNeil does, regardless of Francisco Lindor, who, by the way, let's be honest, I know he's not exactly an all-star, but he should be. He should be, exactly, based on his stats. So to me, overall, the Mets still have some promise. I'm not saying they're going to win a World Series, but at the end of the day, you have to think they're going to be buyers, and you have to think that Steve Cohen's going to come back around the corner and say, yeah, screw this evaluation process. We're the Mets, and we're going to outbuy everybody.
Last thing I'm going to say on baseball before we transition to something else. Brandon Nimmo, 100% deserves to be an all-star. He is third in wins above replacement in the entire National League behind Shohei Ohtani and Bryce Harper since May 15th. That is a large sample size. That is 2 months. And this man somehow is not in the All-Star game. Yet the San Diego Padres have every outfielder in the book in the All-Star game.
I have my whole dispute about Bryce Harper about the year he won MVP most recently because his defensive war was miserable, and Austin Riley deserved that MVP in my utter opinion based on statistics. But that's the unfortunate reality too. We talk about the Home Run Derby, the All-Star game. It's a fan of favorites. I will never forget the year the Kansas City Royals somehow found a way to rig the system, had almost all their starters in the All-Star game being starters. I don't understand how that happens, but at the end of the day, I don't see why managers can't vote for starters and everything else, if you get what I'm saying, in regards to who they feel. I mean, granted, they do get a say in who makes the team, but the best players are the best players. And if you're telling me some of them aren't starters, I don't know how to feel about that.
I don't know either. But before we finish with a couple of extra topics, I want to talk about one other sports thing. So as some of you might know, I've been interning at SiriusXM the last month and a half or so. It's been a lot of fun. I shadowed a show with Michelle Beadle and Cody Decker. Cody's a fascinating story too. Longtime career minor league baseball player and now a radio host. And he brought up an excellent question on that show that I want to pose to you and have a conversation about. Because they were talking about the Celtics and how do they have the potential to become a dynasty now that they've locked up their main 6 players through the next 3 years. I have my doubts because the owners are trying to sell the team. It's a lot of money they've spent. They don't have much bench, and we saw what happened with the Phoenix Suns this year, not having much of a bench. But he posed this question, which I think is a great one. Which of the 4 sports in their current form right now are most conducive to a dynasty? which one is easiest to, have a dynasty? I'll let you think it over for a second.
I think it's the NBA because it's a game of superstars where one player can change the outcome of your team. In football, right? You can be like Patrick Mahomes, have the best offense, and you can have the worst defense in the world and maybe win a Super Bowl, but it's not guaranteed. I mean, look at what he did without an offensive line, right? There's a lot of dynamics that go into
But
football.
here's the deal. I thought it over like the whole 3 hours. It's a crazy person like me. This becomes like a major philosophical, existential crisis trying to figure out the answer to this question. And I mulled the possibilities of all four. The NFL to me was the hardest selling point, which is why I agree with you. I don't really think, and the funny thing is, the NFL has had one of the most recent true dynasties in the New England Patriots and might have another one coming here in the Kansas City Chiefs.
No, they have one with the
yes,
Kansas City Chiefs. It's not coming. They have one with Patrick Mahomes.
But the question was, which one is the easiest? The Patriots lucked into having a generational quarterback, as did the Kansas City Chiefs. But first of all, to your point, I agree with you 100%. It's hard to get 53 players playing in sync, offense and defense. Other deal with the NFL is the playoffs. It's single game elimination. It's easy to screw up and get eliminated in the postseason, even though, like, if you're really good, you only got to win 2 games to make it to the Super Bowl. One mistake, one blunder, and your postseason's over. You don't get a series where it's forgiving like the other 3 sports. So the NFL, I kind of knocked out of the conversation. The NHL is what I kind of thought about, even though there hasn't been a dynasty in a while. The NHL is still the only sport of the 4 where we see players stick around with teams for a long, long time and be willing to sign lengthy contracts with teams. And there's no real superstars asking out and demanding and wanting to be traded, because we see that obviously in the NBA. And I'll argue we see that at some points in the MLB and the NFL as well. But you think of the Pittsburgh Penguins for an example. And while they didn't build a dynasty per se, they were a really, really good team for years. And they have the same guys. Sidney Crosby's been there for almost 20 years. Malkin and Letang have been there for almost 15 years. Phil Kessel was there for like 10 years. They had Marc-Andre Fleury for 10 years. There is more roster consistency in the NHL than other sports. And historically, you can argue the NHL has been the easiest, I think, to get a dynasty because you saw repeat champions many times.
Well, I can agree with that, but if you're looking today in 2024 and evaluating it, I would also say it's hard because, like, hey, while teams like the Panthers, for example, were good, it doesn't mean it lasts forever. The Lightning, right? I mean, that was arguably the best roster to that point anybody has ever seen on paper in terms of production. And it only lasted 2 to 3 seasons. And for a team to be dynasty to the Patriots, the amount of dominance, 10, 20 years, it doesn't come often. And again, I don't know. Hockey, I think, is very iffy today in 2024. I still, in my opinion, I just think it's basketball because of that one player. Now, Major League Baseball, I talked about when we first started Sports Speak. I thought the Dodgers were the closest to being a dynasty at the time because they were constantly going out there, making a difference, buying, and so on. Today, I mean, it's a little bit hard. You couldn't make the dispute about the Astros, but now the Astros are not good, right? So baseball's adapting, baseball's changing, sports changes. Basketball, I'm not saying it doesn't change, but there's a much different athlete in baseball, right, than what we've seen 5, 6 years ago in terms of approach and style. The game has sped up, not just with pitch clocks, everything, but the game dynamic is changing. There's a newer generation. Basketball is their newer generation, but the game hasn't really changed much in terms of its approach and how its pacing is. So to me, overall, I mean, it's hard, right? It's hard to say, but I still think the Boston Celtics, and I agree in regards to the fact that I think they have the potential of being a dynasty, but I still come from that standpoint too. And I've talked about this multiple times here on Sports Speak. If you are complacent and you are not willing to make change and adapt, time will catch up to you eventually. It could be 3, 4 years from now. It could be 5 years from now, for whatever. But once players start getting hurt, especially, and you're not willing to make that change because you're tied to all these contracts, guess what? And that's why the NFL's hard. Players don't last forever because they're financial decisions. Saquon Barkley was a great example for that for the Giants this offseason, where everybody thought he was going to be Giant for life. Well, now he's with the rival, the Eagles, because the Giants didn't want to pay him a certain amount of money.
Well, and that's the risk you run with circling back to your NBA comment. Like the Celtics, I completely understand the desire to want to run it back. You were the best team in the regular season. You essentially cruised through the playoffs. But, locking these guys up for 3, 4 years is risky. And especially when you're talking about Kristaps Porzingis, who has a rare knee injury, Drew Holiday, who I really like, but he's 35 years old. There's risk in that. And again, when you pay all this money, you have no flexibility to really add around
Well,
the team.
and the other thing too, not to switch sports, but wait, the dispute could be about baseball being the easiest, outside the fact, again, the Yankees have 27 World Series in the 90s and so on, were very, very dominant. But think about it like this: what the Dodgers did this last offseason, anybody can buy a baseball team. It makes it feel
Yep.
like, if you have that money and resource, which makes it also a little bit cheap. And granted, the Dodgers haven't won a World Series, right? This is the first season, but that is also a dispute that could be made, which is why I think baseball would be the second closest, because a lot of the good teams are still good year in and year out.
Here's the thing. This is what I ended up deciding upon in my mind if I was going to rank them. If you had asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have argued that baseball was number one. I have dropped baseball to number three in this because of that playoff format that we just harped on, because it's so hard to be consistent and in through the postseason. I would still argue that, to me, based on all of the parameters of how the league functions and the rules within it, I'd say the NHL has a slight leg up over the NBA. I also feel like the injuries in the NBA have, changed the dynamics of playoffs over these last few years. Teams that are great in the regular season can get banged up. Compare that to the NHL. You got guys playing with broken ankles, all kinds of things. They'll play through it and they'll play to the best of their ability. And again, I'm not calling NBA players soft, only some of them are. But if I'm going to rank it, I say NHL, and this is not, based on the current rosters right now, who's most likely to have a dynasty, because the NHL doesn't have that right now. But frankly, neither does the NBA. The NFL is the one with probably the team that's the closest to a dynasty in the Chiefs, and I put them last. I'd rank NHL, NBA, MLB, NFL in terms of which league is the most conducive to dynastic development.
Well, and the other thing too, if you really think about it, what you just gave outside of the NHL, let's say, being the easiest, is look at the roster sizes we just talked about, right? 53-man roster is hard. For baseball, 26 on a 26 on a roster, 40-man roster overall, that's hard to put together and be productive and hope that you're going to be healthy. Hockey's a little bit different. You talk about the longevity, like guys, for example, even like Ovechkin with the Capitals. There is that longevity. But at the same time, good goalies, for example, we talk about what Florida did to win the cup this year. Good goalies don't last forever either, because health changes. Your ability to go chase the puck or move around changes, especially based on injuries. So that's the reason why I view hockey to be a little bit harder. Because the other thing too, and I don't want to go to a different sport that we're not talking about, but like, for example, sports like motocross, where health really does come to a big factor in hockey down the road. Because at the end of the day, if one of your biggest movers is the puck, and one of your best forecheckers can't be up there on the ice in your big games, there's a lot of times you're going to lose big situations, especially too, if some of your best centers are out and they can't facilitate win faceoffs and so on, you're going to lose games even if you have great goaltenders. So there's a lot of if factors. It really, to me, breaks down what the sport is about and the ideal goals. And for me, basketball is the simplest of goals. And again, it's the only sport that I can really think of, other than individual sports, where one player can change. Now, granted, we talk about for years, right? LeBron James carried the Cavs. He carried the Lakers for a season. Then he started finally losing. He's the only player that I can think of that is the pure definition of that. But you look at other teams. I mean, Luka Doncic. Luka Doncic has completely changed the dynamic of the Mavericks,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm not saying they're a dynasty, but like, they've become competitive around one player. The Nets, they got Kevin Durant, right? We thought they were going to be great. It didn't work out, but
But the other side of the coin here, with this whole argument that you're using about with hockey, that player goes down, the dynasty's not going to happen. Luka goes down. The Mavericks are a shell of themselves. I mean, we've seen the Bucks, Giannis, and the Bucks were considered maybe the most complete roster in the NBA going into the season. And forget everything about Doc Rivers, but Giannis and Damian Lillard go down, and they look horrible in the playoffs. So like that's the whole thing. And my contention is the NHL and the NBA have very similar playoff formats, but the NHL, the players play through injury, and we see injury typically have less of an effect. But we want to hear what you have to say. Let us know at Sports Speak Live what you think of this conversation. Before we go, got to touch on two things. Number one is this right here. We went back to Wawa. Last year when we did an episode, Tim was not happy because Wawa missed. They forgot his chicken. Was it a more successful trip this time?
Absolutely. We'll have a picture for you guys on the screen as well of what I ended up getting, but I did come back with the mac and cheese bowl again, half with the mashed potatoes, with the chicken tenders. I finally got the chicken, put a little bit of spinach in, something relatively new. They have crispy jalapenos at Wawa. Another thing too, I tried hot honey, like go wraps, like tiny little snack wraps. Wawa, thank you for getting on that hot honey trend because no place around me wants to do hot honey. I mean, they hit great tonight. Absolutely a 10 out of 10. And again, folks, if you live in New York, I'm sorry, like me, you don't really get Wawa too often.
Travel to Jersey, go to PA.
Yeah, Wawa's like your 24-hour diner. It never misses, and it's always hot and fresh and ready. And this one definitely, outside the fact that last year they messed up, this one here, no problem.
Now he's peering over at us because I know he has something to say here.
I love Wawa so much. As another New Yorker, man, it kills me not getting it as much as I do. The limited edition summer pina colada smoothies are incredible.
I can't believe too. Colin told us today that he thought Sheets was better.
I've only been to Sheets once. It felt like a glorified gas station. Wawa does that? I know Wawa's a gas station, and that's a really
to me,
bad
like
point. But it doesn't.
stop.
Yeah, truck stop. That's what I was thinking. But it feels like a truck stop. Maybe the food's really good. Wawa just has that vibe. It's a place I go with my friends all the time. We run into random people from our high school. We run into people we never thought we'd ever see again. But the one reuniting factor is that bird and those four letters, W-A-W-A, Wawa. It's the greatest place in the world. I love it. I'm glad you love it. I'm glad you love it. It's a wonderful place. We're not sponsored by Wawa at all. I'm just saying it anyway.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Please sponsor us.
Yeah, we'd appreciate it. Who do sponsor us, by the way, is SeatGeek. You can use the promo code SportsSpeak, all caps, one word, $20 off your first purchase. I got to announce something as we shine off of this show. We're doing our fantasy football draft late August, early September. Weeks are counting down. We'll keep you updated. We have 14 teams. Rahil's going to be back. Vinny's going to join us. Other 12 are back. And for those who followed along last year, I did finish in last place. And I will own up to that fact because, you know, I believe in there being a last place punishment. We didn't do one last year. That kind of fell on our part that we didn't really enforce it. But if the host of the show finishes last, I don't think there's much way to avoid it. So I have settled with Tim on what my last place punishment will be. It will occur during the fantasy football draft. It's a two-pronged punishment. I was thinking about how much I dislike goatees, and I would never have one. I'm going to grow things out, and then I'm going to shave, and I'm going to keep a goatee. Just for the draft, I'm going to sit there with a goatee. I will also buy myself a small jar of Hellmann's light mayonnaise, and for the draft, the only things I'll be able to consume, no matter how long it takes, is water and Hellmann's light mayonnaise. So that's going to be my meal during the draft, and I'll be enjoying it and smearing mayonnaise all over my nice, freshly cut goatee.
Good God, all I can think about is the fact that I hope it doesn't go longer than trivia. Because that's a lot of names.
It went till 1:30 in the morning. So we'll see that a lot of mayonnaise. But yeah, so that's that. If you want to see me,
do you like mayonnaise?
No,
I'm not a mayonnaise person. That's the reason why it's like, do you like mayonnaise?
I'll put it on a sandwich. I'm not gonna open up a jar and just start munching.
I had a roommate in college named Brian. He would drink ketchup straight out of the bottle. So like eating mayonnaise, I don't know, maybe Dale Jr. can give me some tips.
I know a dude that put mayonnaise on a candy bar before.
Well,
so
he tell you put some mayonnaise on, you know, like he did the Miracle Whip on a piece of bread and eat it with a banana. But you have to eat straight up mayonnaise.
Yeah. So that's my fantasy punishment. Again, I failed. And now I'm paying the price, but I will own up to that. So you will get to enjoy that during our fantasy football draft. That's in a few weeks. We got a lot more to come next week. Definitely going to touch more on the MLB trade deadline. Any other news? NFL training camps are going to be opening soon. We're going to be doing our NFC East schedule predictions again very soon as well. So keep an eye out for that. Tim's Tiers will be back for next week's episode as well. But until next time, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Signing off of this special Sports Speak Live, episode 181, live from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. We'll be back on Zoom next week.